time to do some more Sportster stuff. This one is about that 85 Ironhead Sportster that I just bought about 2 weeks ago. It's sitting right here off camera to my right. And we're going to jump right into this and pretty much get started working on it. But before I do, I have my handy dandy whiteboard with sort of things I want to test on this bike. Real quickly, I spent a couple hours working on this motorcycle a few days after I bought it. And long story short, it will not run. I've done a compression check on it. It has 125 psi compression front and rear cold, which is good. It has spark to the extent that you can stick a screwdriver in one of the spark plug wires and hold it over near the cylinder head and spin it over, and it will jump a spark. It maybe is a little bit weak, but it doesn't seem terribly bad. It has a brand new Mikuni VM38 carburetor on it. Fuel is getting to the carburetor, and I feel pretty confident that it's getting out of the carburetor and into the cylinders, simply by the fact that this bike will try to run. It'll shoot flames out of the exhaust or spit back through the carburetor, so it's trying to make some kind of combustion. Also, this motorcycle will not run off of starting fluid. Starting fluid does not seem to help the issue, so that makes me feel like this is not a fuel problem. And finally, the last thing that I found when I was messing with this last week was that this bike has the factory electronic ignition. So it has that ignition plate behind the points cover, and it bolts down to 2 screws. The bottom screw was broken off, the top one was loose, so the plate was not tight and locked down in the proper place. But I static timed it. It didn't seem to make a difference. I tried turning the timing retarded and advanced and kind of messing with it in between. Again, I never could get it to actually fire off. The timing cup is intact, it's not broken. The ignition module looks pretty new, but I'm still suspicious of it. I also checked the valve lash on this thing just to make sure that I didn't have like a valve sticking open. And everything seemed okay on my valve lash check. So that's been about a week ago. And today I have a list of things that I want to do. As you can see, pretty much all of this is electrical stuff. I want to test the coil. I want to test the ignition module. I'm still very suspicious of it. I wouldn't be surprised if I find my problem in one of those two things. I want to look at the VOS wiring. This bike came factory equipped with VOS, which is vacuum operated electronic switch, I think is what they call it. Basically, it's just using some vacuum off the intake manifold to electronically advance the timing when you're like cruising, you know, under light throttle, where you can give it some more timing for better fuel economy. That is not on this bike anymore. The switch is gone, and I don't see any of the wiring, but I just want to kind of go back and try and double check through that and make sure that somehow, you know, maybe the wire from what would have gone to the VOS switch that goes over to the module or coil or whatever isn't like grounded out and causing a problem. And I just want to own some spark plug wires. So I'm going to put the whiteboard down, and I'm going to pick up my factory shop manual and my handy dandy voltmeter, and let's go to work. Okay, so we've got the coil pulled off of the bike. This is not the factory coil. It is a Blue Streak coil. It is marked for 1980 to 2002 models, and from some quick reading I could do online, sounds like this is supposed to be around 4.5 to 4.7 ohms, what they call a 5 ohm coil on the primary side, and our secondary side should be like in like a 10 to 12,000 ohm reading. So we've got the multimeter set to ohms, and we're going to take our 2 leads. This is your primary, and we're going to put them across here. Just touch it to them and let it kind of settle. Yeah, 4.7, 4.8. So that seems okay. And now we're going to go in here to your secondary where your spark plug leads go in. Maybe flip it up on end. That's dancing around. That's all over the place. It's 11 or 12 kilo ohms, so that's right at 12,000 ohms, which is where we need to be. But it seems like it's real picky where you get your leads in there. Okay, so the coil testing, the primary looks fine. Secondary, maybe we're a little inconclusive on. You can get it to be in there on the spec. Like I said, it just seems like how you hold your leads has a lot to do with it. I'm going to try and clean out those secondaries, but for now, I'm going to keep moving on and troubleshooting. I'm not entirely convinced that that's our problem. It will make spark. I just kind of think we're making spark at the wrong time. And while we're ohming stuff out, let's do some spark plug wires. These don't have any brand name on them. They just look like some generic parts house ones. So it's about 800 ohms, 7/10 of a kilo ohm for the short one. And about 2,000 ohms, 2 kilo ohms for the long one. Again, I don't know, these are just generic 7mm wires. I don't know what the resistance per foot is on one of these, but if we're gonna say 1,000 ohms per foot, which might be a reasonable assumption, and we're 700 or 800 on that one, and you know, what was it, close to 2,000 on this one, that's probably decent. I'll Google kind of just what a average 7mm spark plug wire resistance per foot is, but really what I was looking for there is we don't have like either A, this huge massive resistance reading where we're like way off the charts, or B, just like a, you know, a short or an open. Onwards and upwards to other things now. The next thing that I want to check is this connector right here, right there, that guy with the red, green, and black on it. This is the connector that runs down into, let's turn the camera, into our cam chest and connects to that ignition module right here. And the factory shop manual calls out a procedure to check this. It wants you to fabricate a jumper wire. You can see it there. LED light banding is probably going to goof this up for us, but instead of fabricating a jumper wire that plugs in through the harness, I'm just going to back probe it with some spoons. So I'm going to get that set up, and we will do that now. Alright, so we are hooked up there in line, and get this so that you can see the screen on the voltmeter. The manual says hooked in there to the black and red with the ignition switch on, which it currently is, and the engine run start switch on. Your voltage there should be 5 volts plus or minus half a volt. So let's turn the switch on. 2/10 of a volt. That's off, on, back off. And now it says if the voltage is not within that range, the computer module is not functioning and must be replaced. Okay, so that's pretty convincing evidence that this ignition module is dead. I was already pretty suspicious of it, but it will not pass that test. Just as a second self-check, I took my voltmeter with the back probe spoons and went over to my bike, did the same test on it, and it passes. So I know that my test was valid and that the results are good, and I can repeat those results on this bike. I called my local Harley dealership to see if they had the part on the shelf, to see if I could go run and grab it today. Of course, they don't have it. They never have anything for bikes this old. They said they can order it, but it'll be like a week and a half out, so screw them. I'll just order it on the internet. So I'm gonna start pulling the cam chest cover off of this thing so I can pull this module out of here. I pulled the module out and started trying to pull the wires through. I couldn't seem to unpin the connector from, unpin the wires from the connector rather. So I just said, oh, maybe I'll get lucky and I can get it fished out to down here where I can get to it a little easier, but it's gotten hung up in there somewhere, so no big deal to pull this cover off. This really, you know, pretty minor. I'll replace the gasket while I'm here and just take a good look at cams and everything and make sure everybody's happy in there while I'm in there. Not too much extra work, really. Yeah. And here's just a little small thing that I do. These are all of the bolts for the cam chest, and they are all slightly different sizes. I know some guys like to number them. Other guys will take like a piece of cardboard and put them, draw it and put it in there, but that takes up a lot of space if you do it full scale. So what I do is I just magnet them in sort of a rough small scale version of how they came out of there, and so long as nobody touches that, I'm good to go. It might not look exactly like the cam cover, but I know what it means, and that's all that matters. I'm not saying you have to do this. This is not a how-to channel. This is just how I do, but maybe this is helpful for someone. Okay, so I have started pulling this off. All the bolts are out of it, and you may or may not be able to tell, but I ended up taking the front pipe off to get it out of the way so that I could get in here to this plate where the forward controls used to be. And the reason I did that is, you see right here, this cam cover has been running into the back of this extension plate for those forward controls. This is yet another one of the reasons I hate forward controls. They just seem to always be in the way. And you may also notice right here in the bottom of the cam cover, it's been rubbing there for quite some time and has rubbed a pretty good notch in it. I have taken the 2 bolts out here for that forward control extension, but the back one is the front motor mount bolt, and I can't get that loose. So I'm gonna take a break from this and walk away from it for a minute, have some lunch, and hopefully come back and take this all the way apart. Okay, so my buddy Sean came over. He was coming over here anyways for something else, and he walked out here through my backyard to my little shop out here where I'm working, and I showed him what was going on, and we talked about it, and he was like, why don't you just cut the top of that bracket off? And I already had that thought, so that's what we ended up doing. He had a cordless grinder on his truck, so we just cut it, and I'll weld it back up. But after we cut it and pulled the cam chest off, we found some nasty surprises. So here's some footage of that. Okay, Sean, you want to give us the grand tour of what we found inside of here?
Well, there's this, which is supposed to be out here.
Yeah, that's a push rod tube clip. It was laying in there. And let me move the camera, and you can show everybody who's watching our wire we found. The camera now on the green, on the wires, they go to the electronic ignition, but then if you follow them, the green wire, I wonder if I can zoom in on that. Let me try and zoom in. Oh yeah, it's pinched like clean in half right there. That's not good. And obviously there's a couple things going on here. Number one is that smashed wire. That green wire for the ignition module was just smashed completely flat, broken all the way in two inside of that sprocket cover, and I have to think that's probably what killed this ignition module. That can't be good for it, having that wire smashed. So I need to order an ignition module, which we already know. Second of all is this. This is the push rod tube lock, and I have absolutely no idea how this ends up in a cam chest on one of these bikes. There's no way for it to fall down in there. That's literally impossible. My only thought is that someone was working on this and had the cam cover off and dropped this in there. And that just puts a lot of doubt in my mind about how the rest of things are. The number 4 cam kind of fell out a little bit when we pulled the cover, which is no big deal, honestly, because having now seen this, I want to pull all of the camshafts out, clean everything up, and just take a really good look in there and make sure that this guy hasn't damaged anything rolling around in there, because it's definitely been smashed. It's smashed flatter and thinner, and it's dented in right here. So it has made contact with something inside of there. I just want to, find out what that something was and repair whatever I have to repair before I even put the cover back on. So I've got some parts to order. I've got a lot of work to do, but I'm done for the day out here today. It's raining, and I'm going to go inside and eat some lunch, even though it's like 3:30. I've been working all day. Time just kind of got away from me. So I pulled all the cams out, and all of it really honestly looks pretty good. The worst of it is right in here on that pinion shaft. I don't know if that's going to come through well on camera, but kind of these gears have like a mark that runs around them, and the edges of those straight cut gears maybe look a little bit rough. I'm thinking that might be what ate that push rod lock, but honestly everything in there doesn't look terrible, so I'm pretty much just gonna put it all back together and make sure it's all timed correctly. Yes, I know this is a lot easier with the push rods out, but you can do it this way too if you're stubborn, and I am. So here we go. Alright, so that is basically what we're looking for there. All of our timing marks are lined up, and now we're just waiting on some parts. We'll put this thing back together in a couple days. Okay, so we've got our cover and our wires are pulled through, and I'm gonna slide this thing up on here and we'll torque it down. I ended up putting just a little skim coat of silicone on this gasket because there's some places on this engine case and on this cover that don't look the greatest. I usually don't put silicone or any kind of dressing on a gasket unless a shop manual calls for it. But in instances like this, I really don't want this to leak, so just a little bit, not too much. Don't go carried away with it. Okay, so our cover is back on and torqued, and you can see I popped the locks for the push rods off, and we're just going to do a quick valve adjustment on this guy and throw this exhaust pipe on the front cylinder. I still have to hook the coil up on the other side, which will only take me a couple seconds. Throw some spark plugs in and put the spark plug wires on, but probably in the next 30 minutes I should hopefully have a running bike. Everything's back together, valves are adjusted, pipes back on it, coils hooked back up, bike's back in neutral, and I've got some jumper cables hooked up with the battery laying in the floor. Headlight looks like it's on. We're gonna go full enricher, fuel is on, engine in run, and see what happens. Nothing happens. Well, that sucks. I just took the voltmeter and checked this battery. This battery is from March of 2023, so it's only a couple months old. It has 9.5 volts in it. I might have left these two batteries jumper together overnight, and that might be what has drawn this thing down. So I am going to unhook the jumper cables, put the battery charger on it, and we'll come back to this later. Alright, it is several hours later, and the battery's been charging. So, let's try this thing. God damn it. Maybe I just need to let this thing sit overnight. Or maybe I just need to go get my big battery charger. Actually, I think that's what I'm going to do right now because I really want to hear this thing run. Almost had it. Yeah, he runs. Man, that's a good feeling to hear that noise. It's like 8:30 at night on a Friday. I'm wrapping it up for the day, but man, I'm psyched. I got this thing running. So quick recap on this. I paid $1,300 for the bike. I now have about $100 worth of parts in it that y'all just watched me put in, so I'm $1,400 into this bike now, and I now have a running motorcycle. Things left to do. Well, I need to weld that plate back on for the forward controls, tighten all that stuff back up, the motor mount. I probably am going to try and look at the brake fluid, maybe bleed some brakes. And then I need to adjust the clutch. The clutch on this is really weak. You pull it all the way in, it doesn't really feel like you're doing much. So hopefully it's just a clutch adjustment issue and I don't have an actual clutch issue going on. And I can adjust the clutch enough where you can shift gears in this bike and I'll be able to take it up the road. So I would love to ride this thing up the street once or twice, and then probably what I'm going to do with it is just list it as is, as a running, rideable project, you know, just write in the ad, bike runs, bike rides, bike stops. It is still a project, but you can run it to the end of my street and back before you put it on your trailer to take it home. And I think that'll make this bike a whole lot easier to sell and probably maximize my profit on it without me having to pour a ton of money into getting this bike road ready up to my standards. So really here we're just trying to flip this thing kind of as quickly and easily as possible with the least amount of money out of my pocket. But for now, hey, I'm psyched. It's another old Ironhead running again, and a few days ago it wasn't. Good stuff. Okay, so it's a couple of days later, and I've gotten some other stuff wrapped up on the bike that we'll talk about in a minute, but I need to do something about this bracket for these forward controls, and I cut this because this top part, this tab, was in the way of the cover coming off, and you can see this sort of square groove that's been ground rubbed into this cam cover. It's not actually been hitting on this tab that I cut off. It's if you put a bolt or a nut in there, this doesn't actually go. When I took this apart, there was half of a bolt. Someone had, I don't know if someone had cut a bolt in half, a bolt head in half, or it just ground itself down over time, where essentially it was just sitting in there like that. And I think that's pretty crappy. So I really don't even think there's any point in trying to weld this piece back on, because I mean, even if I do the bolt this way with the bolt head out and a nut behind it, there's not a nut that's like low enough profile for it to work like that and not be grinding into that front cover. So I think in lieu of welding this back on, what I'm going to do is grind this so it's not such a sharp edge and shoot a little black paint on it so it looks a little better. And then I think I'm going to bolt this plate for the control up and get it as tight as I can and maybe clamp it up here, and then see if I can just drill through both of them and add another bolt and nut further down. I kind of hate to do that because maybe it's a little janky and not the way that this forward control plate was designed to bolt on, but I'm almost positive this forward control plate was designed to bolt straight onto the motor mounts, and that this extension is homemade. Okay, so we've got two bolts in there. It obviously doesn't look, you know, the absolute best, but this is better than it was. At least, you know, that control isn't going to go anywhere when you mash the brake, and also it's not going to be grinding into that cam cover anymore. So I think this is good enough for where we're going with this project. And we're going to move on to some other things. I needed to adjust the clutch on this bike, so off to do that. Alright, so the bike is outside. I ended up putting a new battery in this over the weekend too. Before I spent $100 on a battery, I wanted to just make sure that this bike would actually run. And I'm going to grab the hose pipe and hose this thing down and spray it down with some degreaser and try and clean it up a little bit so it's not quite so grungy. And then I think I'm going to go and try and take this thing up the block on its maiden voyage, and yeah, see how it goes. We're just gonna get everything, because this bike is nasty and grungy and skunky and gross, so just degrease it all. Alright, so we are cleaned up a little here on the bike. It's obviously not, you know, perfect. This is not a show bike by any stretch of the imagination. This is definitely still a project, but it's looking a whole lot better than it did before I started. Especially, look how good that primary came out. Remember how nasty that thing was? Also, part of why I wanted to clean this was, if you remember from my last episode about it, there's a small oil leak between the cylinder head and the jug right there on this rear cylinder. I want to go ride this thing around just a little bit. I'm not going to go far and see how bad that leak is, though I think I'm going to be pleasantly surprised, at least I hope. But yeah, I'm going to go, I'm going to ride this thing up to the house, and but let's go for a ride. Okay, so we are back out here in my shop, and you'll probably notice the bike behind me changed, just back to the little red Evo Sportster. And the reason for that is I got back from riding that Ironhead, and I just parked it in the grass in my front yard. This bike has been parked out there underneath the cover, and I wanted to bring this bike inside, so I'm going to throw that cover on that Ironhead. And yeah, it runs pretty good. It's not perfect. Goes up and down the road, it stops, it shifts. You really got to wham the shifter to get it to shift. I think some of that's probably just due to the janky kind of forward control linkage that's on it. In my personal experience, I've yet to ride a bike that came factory with mids and has been converted to forwards that actually shifts well. Seems like all of them shift poorly, and the factory mids are like 100 times better. Anyways, I'm rambling. And that's really it for this episode. We're going to end it right here. I've taken this bike as far as I want to take it. I did not buy this bike intending to see it all the way through and finish it out, you know, as a fully fleshed out, ready to ride, daily rideable project. This was always, from day one, a bike that I intended to just knock the, you know, stink off of it from sitting for so many years, quickly go through it, get it running, get it to where it could go up the road, and send it on its way to a new home, hopefully to someone who loves it and will put a lot of time into it and make it into a really nice bike. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go inside with my camera and take the memory card out and put the pictures on the computer. And I'm going to write a for sale ad for this one. And that's probably the last time y'all will see this bike on this channel, hopefully. I hope that this bike sells quickly. I'm probably going to list it for like $2,500, I think, is a fair price for a running, riding, still a project, 85 last year, the Ironhead Sportster with the title, matching numbers. I think that's a fair price, and I've got some wiggle room in there to where I can, you know, come down a couple $100 and I'll still turn a really good profit on this motorcycle. As always, thanks for watching. I hope you don't just get dissuaded from this episode thinking that I'm going to turn this into a bike flip channel. Though I will tell you right now, and I'm going to talk about this soon in a future episode, buying and selling motorcycles is something that I'm going to be doing a whole lot more of from here on out. And some of them are going to end up like this one, where I bought it, I went completely through it, it's turned into a really nice, reliable, good bike that I can sell, you know, turnkey, ready to go. And some of the bikes that I buy will end up like this. And some of the bikes are going to end up like this Ironhead, where it comes in, I put a little bit of time and money into it, get it turned around, out the door, off to its new home, and continue to be profitable on those so I can keep doing this that I love doing and not have to go back to work for the man. So that's it. Thanks for watching as always. I really appreciate each and every one of you who watches these episodes, and we'll see you on the next one.